We just kind of wanted to share like a practical use case of how even just using the latest capabilities of ChatGPT alone, last week, we dramatically accelerated planning and innovation for both Marketing AI Institute and Smarter X. So, do you want to maybe walk us through what you and I had worked on?
Yeah. So basically, the way this works is, as the CEO, a lot of my work is on kind of the vision and the high level strategy for the organization. Thinking through our revenue channels, thinking through our current growth opportunities, future growth opportunities, things like that. And so, as I was going through building our 2025 like growth matrix, I sort of landed on this idea that we'd had a couple years back. And it's related to like the media content side of our business. So Mike, as you're aware, is the chief content officer. So I go to Mike with this idea. And I was like, listen, I think we have this opportunity to really scale what we're doing, but to create like tremendous value, like a high velocity of value creation across different industries and for different personas. Um, and so I kind of explained the concept to Mike, and he's like, yeah, I love it. Like, we should do that. And it's like, okay, now what do we do? And so Mike and I spent, 9 years at a marketing agency together, and we've built plenty of strategies and campaigns. And there's always that like to go from idea to action is really hard because someone has to commit the time to build the brief, to go do the research, to do the initial planning so that you can then react to that together. So for me, I was like, okay, I got to put a forcing function in place. I got a bunch of travel coming up. Like, I'm just going to put a meeting for Mike and I. It was last Friday, I think we met. And so by putting that meeting on the calendar, it was like, okay, this will force us to now talk about it. But the Thursday, the day before, we had nothing. We had like blank page. It's like, okay, we have this idea, but like, what do we do? And so what I what I what I then did is rather than Mike and I showing up to that meeting and spending 2 hours just kind of bouncing this idea around, I used ChatGPT to develop drafts of the plan, thinking through various planning, production, promotion, performance, like kind of like the key areas we look at different ways. And I'm basically just giving some prompts to this thing that's saying like, okay, I've got this business idea. It's for our Smarter X brand. And this, I'm using my co-CEO GPT that I built. And so it understands that brand and knows what we do and it knows our revenue channels. And I just said, help me think through this business model. And it's like, okay, great. Like, what do you want to do? And so I kind of like had a conversation around that. And then it was really good. And this is all happening over like 3 minutes. And then I said, okay, create a task list for the planning and production of the content that we're going to create without getting into all the details. And then I was like, okay, we're going to do this for different industries and personas. How do we identify and prioritize verticals and personas, to help drive our decision making? And it created, again, an amazing brief on this thing. Now, as I said, Mike and I did this stuff for a living. Like, we have the ability to do this. But the reality is, for us to do this would probably have taken 10, 20 hours to do the
Yeah.
kind of planning that went into this. Now, there was nothing that ChatGPT output that we wouldn't have probably thought about if we had enough time. Like, if Mike or I could go away for 3 days and just think deeply about this idea, we may have come up with 80, 90% of what ChatGPT did. But the reality is ChatGPT did this in 3 minutes.
Mhm.
And so my thinking here was, rather than Mike and I sitting staring at a blank page and ideating from zero, we now had, I don't know, it's probably like 2,000 words or so structured really nicely in an outline and brief for us to react to. And so we
Mhm.
get into the meeting on Friday and I said to Mike, I was like, let's just walk through what ChatGPT did. And let's start talking through things we like, things we don't, if we have any other ideas. And there came a time, what, Mike, like 15 minutes into it, we're like, hold on a second. This is actually a really interesting idea. Let's like
Yep.
lean into this for a couple minutes. And honestly, it ended up leading to a conversation that may change like our whole go to market strategy for Smarter X next year.
Mhm.
And if we hadn't had ChatGPT develop the brief, I don't know that we would have got there. And then I go away like this week, and then we run into AI Agency Summit, and then it's Thanksgiving, and all of a sudden it's middle of December, and Mike and I haven't made any progress. Instead, we're going to spend the next 30 days pushing hard on the few things that came out of it that were actionable. So that to me is like a fundamental way to use these tools today. Use them as planning assistants. And then The other thing we did is we traditionally use Zoom, but for this one, I really wanted to try Google Meet. Now, I'd had a meeting last week where we did the video, the transcript, and the summary with Google Meet, and I was pretty impressed. Like it was really solid. And so we have Google Workspace. So I said to Mike, like, let's try Google Meet for this one. And so we did Google Meet and we used it, did the video, the transcript, the summary, which was great. So the whole thing, Mike and I met for like 2 hours.
Yeah.
And I feel like we made a month's worth of progress by just infusing ChatGPT in like that brainstorm process. So I don't know. How did you feel about it, Mike? I mean, you lived through the experience too.
Yeah, no, I felt very similarly. What really struck me too is like everything you just described is like if we had a really smart employee like brief us
Yeah.
on initial ideas, which then gave us the bandwidth and the time to actually, I would argue, do what we should be doing and do best, which is actually exploring and operationalizing more ideas or creating our own based on that. We would
Yep.
never have gotten there. We would have spent all the time getting the initial brainstorming done. And like you said, nothing would have happened as fast as it happened.
Yep. Yeah. One other note I'll make here, and I mentioned this to Mike, was so I did all this in ChatGPT. Then, because we're a Google Workspace shop, I copied and pasted everything because I wanted to share it with Mike. Now I can share the chat, but we wanted to be able to comment on it. We wanted to be able to like interact with it. So I needed that ChatGPT output into Google Docs. So you copy and paste, and unfortunately, all the formatting goes away. And maybe,
Right.
I don't know, maybe there's something I'm doing wrong there, but I've tested multiple ways, and it just jacks up the formatting. It puts all the pound signs and everything in there. And so then, as Mike and I are going through, I'm like changing the format. It's kind of annoying. Now that's an opportunity for Google if you think
Yeah.
about it, because direct integration into Google Docs would be brilliant. But I'm not saying ChatGPT per se. Like if you use Google Gems, you can export to Docs right away. There's actually a button to send it to Docs, like share into the Docs, and it does nice formatting. The problem is Gems seems way behind custom GPTs at the moment. So like I went in and tried to do the same thing with a gem. One, I can't find any information about the context window for the instructions. I don't know what the character limit is. Like I know
Mm.
in ChatGPT it's 8,000. I can't find that anywhere for gems. There's no guide when you're in there. There's no ability to do conversation starters, which is like a really awesome feature of ChatGPT. I don't know how to do those. I think the gems are 100% private. They don't train on them. I think if I share them with you, only you can see them, but I have no idea. Like, and so just a note to the Google team, like gems is a huge opportunity, but I can't find anything other than like the blog post announcing that they exist in August.
Yeah.
And then like some user generated guides to it. But even those didn't answer the questions I had about character limits and conversation starters and things like that. So I feel like if Google Docs had Gemini baked right in, because if you go into Google Docs and just use the help me write thing, it does not do anything like what ChatGPT or Gemini are capable of doing. So like, I just want the functionality to do my planning right in Google Docs
Yeah.
with Gemini without having to go through all this other stuff. And that does not exist. But because Google has Google Workspace, there's a big opportunity if they can crack actually making gems highly functional and valuable, and that integration with Google Docs right away. Now, Microsoft obviously has the same capability with ChatGPT and Word, but that would be a great unlock in terms of value creation.
Yeah, and you and I had even tested. Obviously, there is Gemini within Docs, but even then, I don't know if it's due to what information it pulls, what model is being used. But like we tried more sophisticated prompts right in Google Docs,
Yeah.
and it's just not there. The same prompt works really well if you go open up your own instance of Gemini. So
Yeah, it's
we know
very
it,
limited in its
right,
capabilities in Docs.
right.
It is not the same chat bot for sure. Which maybe that's the need. It's like stop trying to be one thing in one doc and one in the other. It's
Mm.
just integrate the things. So yeah, so the moral story here is push on using these tools as a planning tool for next year. Like there's a ton of value sitting there and it can really accelerate things. Like again, I always use these examples of what would I pay to have that function. So forget $20 a month for ChatGPT. For Mike and I, it's $40 a month or whatever that number is. If I would have done that myself. We're talking 10 to 20 hours. What is 10 to 20 hours of my time worth?
Right.
A lot to me. So the fact that I didn't have to do that, if that was just like, hey, you can use it to help with this plan, what would you pay for it? I'm probably like, I don't know, $1,000, $2,000. Like if a ChatGPT is going to create this for me, that Mike and I could just spend 2 hours reacting to it instead, I would have happily paid thousands of dollars as a business user for that one use case.
Yeah, that's incredible. And like we've talked about a couple times, it's like whether you're trying to figure out more use cases or trying to figure out how to get started, go create a GPT that does helps you do your job, like co-CEO. Just think of it that way. Put your job description in and be working with it regularly.